guys, welcome you all to the Insights into Books podcast. Let's start today's discussion, guys. So we have a heavy one on the desk today. And I don't mean heavy as in, long book. It's actually surprisingly short.
Very compact. Yeah.
But heavy in terms of, well, the gravity of it. It's a book that you find on the shelf of like every psychology student, every philosopher, and I think anyone who's ever really hit a low point and looked for a way up.
I agree.
We're doing a deep dive into Viktor Frankl's man's search for meaning.
It really is the ultimate testament to the human spirit. And I almost feel like calling it a book is the wrong word.
Oh, you mean?
It feels more like a piece of evidence.
Okay.
It's this historical psychological proof that the human mind can withstand conditions that really, by all logical rules, should just completely destroy it. It's
Right.
a survival manual, but not in the sense of, how to build a fire.
No, it's a manual for the soul.
That's it, exactly.
And that's a key point because there are so many memoirs from the Holocaust. We have the historical accounts, we know the horror. But Frankl isn't just recounting history. He's doing something very specific.
A very different project, yeah.
He's looking at the concentration camp not just as a survivor, which he was, but as a psychiatrist.
Right.
And that's a completely different lens.
That is the lens that matters here. You have to remember his background. Viktor Frankl was a practicing neurologist and psychiatrist in Vienna long before the war. He was already established, already working on his own theories about meaning, specifically in preventing suicide among young people.
So he was already deep in this field.
Deep in it. And then he's just thrown into the absolute machinery of the Nazi concentration camps. Auschwitz, then Dachau. So you have this unbelievably tragic but also unique situation where an expert on the human mind is forced to observe its total disintegration in real time.
Including his own.
Including his own, yeah. He's both the subject and the scientist.
It's like a grotesque laboratory. He's suffering immensely, but there's a part of his mind that's taking notes.
He calls it a study in survival spirituality.
Yeah.
And here's a detail that just always gets me. He wrote the first draft of this book in 9 days.
9 days.
9 days. He gets liberated in 1945. He makes his way back to Vienna, and he finds out everyone is gone. His pregnant wife murdered, his parents gone, his brother gone. He's completely alone, and he just sits down, and this pours out of him.
Wow.
And, he originally wanted to publish it anonymously. He wasn't after fame. He just wanted to get the data out there, the theory. He thought the lessons were too important to be tied to his own name.
Which tells you everything, doesn't it? He was trying to solve a problem for humanity, not just tell his own tragic story.
Exactly.
So I think for our discussion today, it makes sense to mirror the book's structure. We can't just jump straight to the, the hopeful philosophy at the end.
No, you have to earn it.
You have to earn it. You have to go through the mud first.
Yeah.
We need to understand the psychology of the prisoner to even begin to grasp why his theory, logotherapy, holds so much water.
You have to see the furnace where it was forged.
Precisely. So let's go back to the beginning of that journey. Frankl breaks it down into 3 distinct psychological phases that pretty much every prisoner went through. Again, this isn't focused on the physical torture we know about the beatings and starvation. This is about how the mind processes that trauma.
Right.
Phase 1 is admission and shock.
The shock. It's the first assault on the psyche, and it's defined by this very peculiar psychological mechanism that Frankl names the delusion of reprieve.
The delusion of reprieve. I feel like we see micro versions of that in our own lives, but in the context of arriving at Auschwitz, what did that look like?
It's a defense mechanism, a powerful one. You see it in condemned prisoners right before an execution. The mind just refuses to accept what's about to happen.
Okay.
So picture it. You're on a cattle car, crammed in with 80 other people, days without water. You look through the slats and you see the sign, Auschwitz.
You know what that means? The rumors are out there.
Intellectually, yes, you know it's a death camp. But your mind just snaps. It goes into this protective mode. You think, no, surely not me. There must be a mistake. This won't be as bad as they say. Maybe we're just going to a labor camp. It's a desperate hope.
He even describes seeing the SS officers on the platform, and the strange thing was, they looked normal.
Yeah, and that fed the delusion. They looked well-fed, rosy cheeks, joking with each other. And the prisoners, desperate for any sign of hope, they latch onto that. They think, see, there's civilization here. These men aren't complete monsters. They're just soldiers. It might be okay.
It's the brain just trying to buffer the trauma. Because if you accepted the full crushing reality of that moment...
You just collapse. You wouldn't be able to walk off the train.
And then comes what he calls the finger game.
Mm.
This is one of the most chilling parts of the entire book, just because of how quiet and bureaucratic it is.
The banality of evil right there in action. You have a single SS officer. He's standing there. Maybe he looks a little bored, smoking a cigarette. And as this long line of terrified people shuffles past, he just flips his finger left, right, right.
No words.
No words at all, just a finger.
And Frankl, being a doctor, he tries to play the game. He tries to stand up straight, buff out his chest, look fit for work.
He's trying to look useful. He hides his haversack under his coat so he doesn't look like a skinny intellectual.
Yeah.
And the finger points, right, he didn't know it at the time, but left was the gas chambers. Instant death. Right was the slave labor camps.
A slow death, but a chance.
A chance. About 90% of the people on his transport went to the left.
And the ones who went right, they were still in this delusion. They'd ask the veteran prisoners, "Where's my friend? He was just here. He went to the left side."
And the veterans, who are long past any delusions, would just point to the smokestacks of the crematorium. They'd say, "That's where your friend is. He's floating up to heaven."
And even then, he says, the newcomers couldn't process it.
The mind just can't. The shock is a wall. But that wall starts to crumble with the next step, the stripping of identity. Total erasure.
This is where that delusion of reprieve is just shattered into a million pieces. They take everything.
Everything. And Frankl, in this moment of tragic irony, he tries to negotiate. He's an intellectual. He has his life's work, a scientific manuscript about his theories, sewn into the lining of his coat.
He thinks reason will prevail.
He tries to explain to a guard, "Look, this is my brainchild, my life's work. It's scientifically important." And the guard just laughs in his face. A crude curse.
And Frankl said that laugh was the moment the old world died for him. He realized he wasn't Dr. Viktor Frankl anymore. He wasn't a scholar. He wasn't a husband. He was prisoner number 119,104.
He writes, "All we possessed literally was our naked existence."
And they meant that literally. They shaved their heads, their entire bodies, every single hair.
Why? What's
Yeah.
the psychological purpose of that total body shaving? Dehumanization. It's about removing individuality. It makes everyone look the same, like a walking skeleton. It breaks the connection you have to your former self. You look in a mirror or a reflection, and you don't recognize the person staring back. You look at your friend, and he's a stranger. It's designed to make you feel like an animal.
But then something strange happens. He says that once the shock truly set in, it was replaced by a kind of grim humor, a weird curiosity.
Dissociation. It's the mind splitting itself to survive. You become an observer of your own fate.
Curiosity in a death camp. That seems impossible to imagine.
He describes them all standing naked in the shower room, freezing, waiting for the water to come on or the gas. They didn't know which it would be. And they started joking about their own nakedness, you know? Well, at least we don't have to worry about our clothes getting wet anymore.
It's so absurd.
But that absurdity is a shield. It creates distance. And they had this almost clinical curiosity. I wonder if I'll catch a cold from this.
And did they?
No. That's the medical miracle of the camps. The textbooks say if a person is subjected to that kind of stress, malnutrition, and exposure, they get pneumonia and die. But they didn't. The body went into this primal survival mode that just defied all known medical science.
So the body held on.
The body held on. They slept 9 men to a single wooden bunk, 2 thin blankets, no hygiene. But Frankl realized that our understanding of the limits of the human body is, well, it's wrong. We have no idea what we can endure until we're forced to.
But the mind.
Yeah.
The mind was on a razor's edge.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings us to the thought of suicide. The run into the wire.
Yes. That was the camp slang for it. The camps were surrounded by a high-voltage electric fence. Touching it was instant death. And in that first phase, the shock phase, Frankl says almost everyone thought about it.
It seemed like the only logical choice left.
Exactly. Why endure the beatings, the starvation, the disease? If the probability of death is 95% anyway, why prolong the agony?
But Frankl made a promise to himself.
He did. On that very first night in Auschwitz, looking at the prisoners who had been there for a while, who looked like walking corpses, he made a pact with himself. He would not run into the wire.
Why not? Was it fear?
It was a cold statistical calculation. He told himself, my life is, for all intents and purposes, already over. I am statistically dead. And if you've already accepted death, then you have nothing to lose by continuing the experiment. It's a very subtle mental shift, but it's incredibly powerful. It removes the active fear of death because you've already written it into the equation. You just decide to be an observer and see what happens.
And that's the transition out of phase 1. The shock is gone. You're still alive. You wake up the next day, and the next, and you enter a new state.
Yeah.
Phase 2, entrenchment. And the dominant feeling here isn't shock or fear anymore.
No, it's apathy.
Apathy.
An emotional death.
And we have to be really clear. This isn't the kind of apathy like, oh, I can't be bothered to do the dishes. This is a profound physiological and psychological shutdown.
So why does the mind do that? Is it just being worn down? It's a protective shell. If you had to feel the full reality of Auschwitz with your normal pre-camp emotional sensitivity, if you truly felt the grief of every death, the horror of every beating, the degradation of every moment, your nervous system would just short circuit. You would go completely insane.
So the prisoner develops a callus on their soul.
A perfect way to put it. You become emotionally blunted. You just stop caring. You build a wall between your inner self and what your eyes are seeing every day.
Frankl tells that horrifying story about the typhus patient. He was working as a medic in the sickbay at this point, but even he wasn't immune to this blunting.
No one was. He's sitting outside, sipping his daily ration of watery soup, the one thing keeping him alive. And he watches as two prisoners drag a corpse up a set of stone steps. They're holding the feet, so the head is just bumping on every single step. Thud, thud, thud.
And what's his reaction?
Nothing. He keeps sipping his soup. He doesn't look away. He doesn't feel sick. He doesn't feel pity. He's just focused on the soup. And he said later, when he reflected on that moment, it terrified him. It showed him just how much of his own humanity he had been forced to amputate just to get through the day.
It's a total regression. You know, we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs with self-actualization at the top and basic survival at the bottom.
The pyramid just collapses.
Yeah, there's no pyramid anymore. It's just the bottom layer.
Yeah.
Food, sleep, avoiding a beating. That's the entire universe.
The entire mental life narrows down to that. He said that in this phase, prisoners didn't dream of freedom or their wives or their old lives. They dreamed about bread.
Bread, cake.
Cake.
Wow.
Warm soup. They would have these intense, hours-long discussions about their favorite recipes. It was an obsession. And that regression is so dangerous because if you stay in that state, you become an animal. You're just a stomach waiting to be filled. The why is gone.
There's that heartbreaking story he tells about a man having a nightmare. Frankl hears him groaning and thrashing in his bunk. And his first instinct, as a doctor, is to wake him up.
Of course. To save him from whatever horror he was dreaming, he reaches out his hand to shake the man's shoulder.
But he stops?
He stops his hand mid-air because he has this sudden, awful realization. No dream, no matter how terrible, could possibly be worse than the reality of this camp. To wake him up would be an act of cruelty. Sleep was the only escape, even a haunted sleep. The reality was the true nightmare.
But even in this phase of apathy, there were levels. There were people who slipped too far. He calls them the Muselman.
The Muselman. It's a camp-specific term, and it's horrifying. It was the name the prisoners gave to those who had completely given up.
And you could see it in them.
Instantly, you could spot them. They stopped trying to wash themselves. They stopped marching with any kind of rhythm. They just shuffled. And the final telltale sign, they would smoke their own cigarettes.
You have to explain the cigarette economy for that to make sense. It sounds so trivial, but it was life and death.
It was everything. Cigarettes were the currency of the camp. They were life. A couple of cigarettes could be traded for an extra bowl of soup. An extra bowl of soup was calories, and calories were a few more days of life. So the only people who would actually smoke their cigarettes were either the capos, the prisoner guards who had plenty, or the men who had decided to die.
So if you saw a man smoking his last cigarette,
you knew he'd given up on eating, he was cashing in his chips, he had resigned from life, and he'd be dead within 48 hours.
It's that direct link between the mind and the body. The second the will to live is gone, the body just follows.
It shuts down. The immune system collapses. A latent infection flares up. The body follows the mind. Frankl saw it happen over and over. He tells the story about a fellow prisoner, a prominent composer, who told him about a dream he'd had.
A dream?
A dream that a voice told him he would be liberated, that the war would end for him on March 30th. He was absolutely convinced. He was filled with this incredible hope. It kept him going through February and most of March.
But as the day got closer,
as March 30th approached, the news from the front lines was bad. The war clearly wasn't ending. On March 29th, the man suddenly developed a high fever. On March 30th, the day of his prophesied liberation, he became delirious. On March 31st, he was dead.
Wow.
Now, physically, the cause of death was typhus. But Frankl was certain that the real killer was the profound disappointment. The loss of hope destroyed his body's ability to fight. His why had an expiration date, and when it passed, he died.
So that's the central question then, isn't it? We've talked about the shock, the apathy, but how did anyone survive that? What was the mechanism that kept Frankl and others from becoming a Muselmann?
This is where he constantly comes back to Nietzsche. It is the absolute backbone of this book. He who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow.
That's the thesis statement right there.
It is. Frankl observed, as a scientist, that survival had almost no correlation with physical strength. In fact, often the big, robust men, the ones used to heavy manual labor, were the first to break down.
Why?
Their metabolisms required too much food, for one. But more importantly, they often lacked the inner resources. The people he called intellectuals, the sensitive types, often had a better chance of survival. Their bodies were weaker, but their minds had anchors. They had somewhere to retreat to.
Okay, let's unpack those anchors. He identifies a few specific strategies. The first one was his work, that manuscript.
His manuscript, yes. It became an obsession. He felt he had a unique contribution to make to the world, a new theory of psychotherapy. He believed he was the only one who could write this specific book. So even when he had typhus, delirious with a high fever, what did he do? He kept himself awake by mentally reconstructing the book, scribbling notes on tiny scraps of paper he'd find.
So the desire to finish the work was literally stronger than the disease.
It gave him a reason to survive the fever. He felt a responsibility not to himself, but to the future readers of that book.
He also used visualization, which is a technique you hear about with elite athletes now. But he was using it to survive torture.
It's a brilliant form of psychological detachment. He would be out on a work detail, digging a trench in the freezing mud, his feet swollen and frostbitten, a guard screaming at him. And in his mind, he would just leave. He would transport himself to a warm, well-lit lecture hall in post-war Vienna.
And he'd see himself at the podium.
Wearing a suit, calm, addressing an attentive audience. And what was the topic of his lecture? It was the psychology of the concentration camp.
So he turned his present suffering into a subject of future study.
Exactly. He objectified the pain. He created this gap between the Frankl who is suffering and the Frankl who is observing. By looking at his own torture from the outside, as a scientist, he gained a sense of mastery over it. It wasn't just meaningless pain anymore, it was data. And data is manageable. It gave the suffering a purpose.
Another anchor which surprised me was what he calls the inner life. He talks about the importance of art and nature. It seems almost frivolous in a death camp.
You would think so, but he argues it was essential. He called it a spiritual retreat. When the entire world outside you is an ugly, brutal hell, the only place you can find beauty is inside.
He describes a sunset.
Yeah, a stunning moment. The prisoners are being marched back from a worksite, exhausted, filthy, and the sun begins to set over the Bavarian mountains, and the sky just explodes with color purples, oranges, reds, all in stark contrast to the gray mud and the gray uniforms. And one prisoner turns to another and whispers, "How beautiful the world could be."
That word.
Could.
That's the key. It's an acknowledgement that beauty still exists as a concept, even if they are currently excluded from it. It reminds them that they are human beings capable of aesthetic appreciation, not just beasts of burden.
And humor. We touched on it briefly, but he calls humor the soul's weapon.
It really is. It's one of the few things that allows you to rise above your situation, even for a second. If you can laugh at something, you have a kind of mastery over it. You're not just its victim.
He and a friend made a pact to tell each other one funny story every day. Dark humor, of course. They'd make jokes about the future. They'd imagine themselves at a fancy dinner party after the war. And when the hostess brings out the soup, they'd joke about forgetting their manners and instinctively yelling, "Please, ladle from the bottom."
Because in the camp, the only solid bits of food, the potatoes or peas, sank to the bottom of the vat.
Right. If you got soup from the top, you just got dirty water.
Yeah.
It's a tragic joke, but it's funny. It breaks the tension. It asserts their humanity.
But the most powerful anchor of all, the one that really seems to define Frankl's whole philosophy, is love.
This is maybe the most beautiful part of the whole book. He's on one of these death marches in the freezing dark. His feet are bleeding. He's in agony. A guard is shouting. And his mind just grabs onto the image of his wife. He sees her face so clearly. He hears her voice. And he begins to have a conversation with her in his mind.
Not a hallucination, but a vivid mental dialogue.
Exactly. And in that moment, her presence feels more real to him than the misery around him. And he has this sudden, profound epiphany. He writes, "The salvation of man is through love and in love." He realizes that love is not just about physical presence. It's a spiritual reality. It literally lifts him out of the mud and the pain.
And the most incredible part of that story, the part that always gives me chills, is that at that moment he had no idea if she was even still alive.
And he realizes it doesn't matter. Now, that's a difficult concept to grasp, but he writes that even if he had known for certain she was dead, the conversation, the feeling of love would have been just as real and just as strengthening. The act of loving was the fuel, the love itself was the anchor, and it didn't depend on the physical existence of the beloved. It was an anchor in the infinite.
So we have work, inner life, humor, and love as these tools for spiritual survival. But eventually, the war does end. The camps are liberated. And this brings us to phase 3, the psychology of release.
Liberation, phase 3.
Now, if this were a movie, this is the happy ending. The gates swing open, the music swells, everyone is crying with joy.
And Frankl is very clear that it was nothing like that. The dominant feeling was what he called depersonalization.
So they walked out of the gates and they felt nothing.
They looked at the green fields, they saw the flowers, Allied soldiers were offering them cigarettes and chocolate, but they couldn't grasp it. It all felt like a dream. He said they had forgotten how to feel pleased. Their capacity for joy had just atrophied.
You can't just flip the emotion switch back on after years of intentional shutdown.
No, they had to relearn how to be human. They had to literally relearn how to feel happiness.
He talked about the body reacting first, like a diver getting the bends from coming up from the deep ocean too quickly.
The body went wild. People were eating ravenously for days. Their bodies were just screaming for nutrients. And they talked. They talked for hours and hours, this compulsive need to speak, to get the trauma out. But the soul was much slower to thaw. And then, for many, came the bitterness.
The tragedy of the return. You survive hell, dreaming of your home, and you finally get back. And your old neighbor just says, oh, hello, we didn't know it was that bad. We suffered too. You know, we had food rationing.
The chasm between the experience of the survivor and the world they return to is just unbridgeable, and that leads to this crushing disillusionment, and then the final blow. Most of them return to find no one was waiting.
Like Frankl himself. The why that kept him alive, the thought of seeing his wife again, was gone.
He gets back, and she's dead. His parents are dead. The home is gone. The very thing that sustained him through the absolute worst is taken away at the moment of liberation.
And that is the ultimate test. That's the precipice. And he has to use his own philosophy on himself to rebuild his life from absolute zero, which transitions us perfectly into the second part of our deep dive.
Oh.
The theory itself, logotherapy.
Right. So Frankl survives all this. He returns to Vienna, and he begins to formalize his experiences into a coherent school of psychotherapy. To really get logotherapy, you have to know what it was responding to.
The other big Viennese schools. First, of course, was Sigmund Freud.
Freud is the will to pleasure. The Freudian view is that human beings are primarily driven by biological urges, the libido, the desire to reduce tension and feel good.
Then you have Alfred Adler, another giant.
Adler is the will to power. He argued that the main drive is to overcome feelings of inferiority. We want to achieve, to be superior, to have status.
And then comes Frankl, the third Viennese school of psychotherapy.
And Frankl looks at his experiences in the camps and says, essentially, Freud is wrong and Adler is wrong. In Auschwitz, there was no pleasure. The will to pleasure was a joke. And there was certainly no power. They were absolute slaves. The will to power was non-existent.
So what was left?
The one thing that was left, the one thing that seemed to make the difference between life and death, was the will to meaning.
The deepest, most fundamental drive in a human being is not to be happy or powerful or rich. It's to find a meaning, a purpose in one's life.
That is the core premise. And Frankl's argument is that when we don't find that meaning, we get sick. We fall into what he called the existential vacuum.
That sounds like a sci-fi term, but I think it describes the modern condition perfectly.
It's the plague of our time. Frankl argued that for most of human history, we had animal instincts telling us what we must do to survive. Then, for centuries, we had traditions, religion, community telling us what we should do.
But now,
in the modern West, we have unprecedented freedom. The instincts are quiet, the traditions are crumbling, so we no longer know what we must do, we don't know what we should do, and very often we don't even know what we really want to do.
we're just staring into the void.
And the void stares back. He coined the term Sunday neurosis.
I love that term. It's that feeling on a Sunday afternoon, right? The work week is over, the chores are done, the distractions stop. You sit on the couch, and this wave of emptiness hits you.
Because the busyness was masking the void. When the noise stops, you're forced to confront the lack of content, the lack of meaning in your life. That's the vacuum. And we try to fill it with junk.
What kind of junk?
We either default back to Freud and try to fill it with pleasure, alcohol, drugs, mindless entertainment, consumerism, or we default to Adler and try to fill it with power, money, status, workaholism, or, and this is a big one, we just conform. We do what everyone else is doing because we're terrified of having to make our own choices.
But none of it works because the whole is shaped like meaning.
Yeah.
You can't fill a meaning-shaped hole with pleasure or power. It's the wrong tool for the job.
Exactly. So the obvious question is, how do we find meaning? And Frankl gives us a very clear roadmap. It starts with what he called the ultimate freedom.
This is the core Stoic idea, isn't it?
Pure stoicism forged in the fires of Auschwitz. The Nazis took everything from him, his clothes, his name, his family, his manuscript, his hair. But he had this realization. There was one thing, and only one thing, they could never take away from him.
What was it?
The last of the human freedoms. To choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way.
You cannot control what happens to you. You can't control the cancer, the car crash, the concentration camp. But you have absolute control over how you respond to it.
And in that space between stimulus and response lies our freedom and our growth. That means life is never meaningless. Because even if you are locked in a cell, you have the supremely meaningful choice of how you bear your suffering. You can face it with dignity and courage, or you can crumble with self-pity. That choice is a meaningful act in itself.
Okay, so let's get practical. Frankl says there are 3 specific avenues to discovering meaning. If someone listening feels like they're in that vacuum, what can they actually do?
Avenue 1, creating a work or doing a deed. This is the path of achievement. It's about making a contribution to the world. For Frankl, it was writing his book. For someone else, it could be raising a family, building a business, creating art, volunteering at a shelter. You are giving something to the world that wasn't there before you.
So creative and productive values. What's the second avenue?
Avenue 2, experiencing something or encountering someone. This is the path of receptivity. It's about appreciating the good in the world. This could be experiencing beauty in nature or in art, but the highest form of this is experiencing another human being in their uniqueness, which is simply love.
Love is an avenue to meaning.
The primary one, he would argue. And he says that loving someone isn't just a feeling, it's an act of seeing. By loving someone, you see the potential within them, the person they could be, and you help them to actualize it. You see the best in them and help bring it forth.
Okay, so we have creating and we have loving. But then there's the third avenue. This is the hardest one. This is for when the other two are taken away from you, when you can't work and you can't experience joy.
The attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. Now, that word unavoidable is critical. Frankl is not a masochist. He's not saying suffering is good. He says if you can remove the cause of suffering, you have a responsibility to do so.
So if you get the surgery, get the surgery.
Exactly. Don't suffer needlessly. But if the suffering is unavoidable, an incurable illness, the loss of a loved one, being in a concentration camp, then the last remaining path to meaning is in the stance you choose to take toward that fate.
The story he tells about the elderly doctor explains this better than any abstract theory.
It's the perfect illustration. An old general practitioner comes to see Frankl. The man is severely depressed. His wife of many decades had died 2 years prior, and he's just broken. He can't get over his grief.
So what does Frankl do?
He doesn't prescribe him pills. He doesn't analyze his childhood. He listens. And then he asks him one single question.
What is the question?
He says, "Doctor, tell me, what would have happened if you had died first and your wife had had to survive you?"
Oh.
And the old doctor immediately says, "Oh, that would have been unbearable for her. She would have suffered so terribly."
And then Frankl just delivers the final thought.
He says, "You see, doctor, you have spared her that suffering, and the price you have to pay for that is to survive and mourn her."
And what happened?
The man stood up, didn't say another word, shook Frankl's hand, and walked out. The suffering hadn't changed. His wife was still gone. The pain was still there. But the meaning of the suffering had been transformed. It was no longer pointless agony. It was a sacrifice. He was suffering for her.
Suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning.
That's the formula. It changes the entire chemistry of the pain. It gives you a why, and with a why, you can bear almost any how.
This relates to what Frankl says about happiness. In our culture, we are obsessed with the pursuit of happiness. But Frankl says that's a huge mistake.
He calls it the paradox of happiness. He says happiness is like a butterfly. If you chase it, it flies away. If you try to pursue happiness directly, you become self-conscious and anxious. You're constantly taking your emotional temperature. Am I happy yet? How about now? And that very act kills it.
So how do you find happiness?
You don't. You forget about it. You dedicate yourself to a cause greater than yourself or to a person other than yourself. You focus on finding meaning. And then happiness ensues. It comes in through the side door as an unintended byproduct. You have to have a reason to be happy. Focus on the reason, and the feeling will take care of itself.
So in the later editions of the book, he added a postscript that I think is so important. He calls it the case for a tragic optimism. He doesn't pretend life is easy. He acknowledges what he calls the tragic triad.
Yes. He says that all human existence is inevitably characterized by three things that no one can escape: pain, guilt, and death.
Sounds pretty bleak.
It does, but his answer isn't despair. It's tragic optimism. It's the human capacity to say yes to life in spite of those three realities. And he shows us how to find meaning in each one. We've already talked about flipping pain-turning unavoidable suffering into a personal achievement.
What about guilt? That's a huge burden for so many people.
Guilt is about the past. Frankl says you shouldn't just wallow in it. Guilt has a purpose. It's a signal that you've done wrong, and it's an opportunity to change for the better. You use the guilt from a past mistake as the fuel to become a better person in the future. You don't ignore it, you transcend it.
And death. How on earth do you flip death into something positive? It's the ultimate source of anxiety for most people.
This might be my favorite part of his entire philosophy. He argues that the very fact that life is finite is what gives it meaning.
How does that work?
Think about it. If we lived forever, nothing would really matter. You could write that novel today or in 1,000 years. You could tell someone you love them now or in 1,000,000 years. There's no urgency. But because our time is limited, every single moment is a choice. You have to choose now because this moment will never come again.
He talks about the past being a storehouse.
Having been is also a kind of being. He says once you have lived a moment, once you've performed a courageous act or loved someone or endured a hardship with dignity, you have saved it into the past. It's there forever. No one can ever take it away from you. You've harvested it and stored it in the granary of your life. So death isn't an eraser, it's the deadline that forces us to fill the granary.
That leads directly to his concept of responsibility. He admired America, but he had one major critique of our obsession with freedom.
He said, freedom is only half the story. Freedom is the negative aspect. It's freedom from something, like tyranny or oppression. But freedom is pointless unless it's paired with its positive counterpart. Freedom to do something. Freedom for a purpose.
He even suggested we build a new statue.
He did. He said the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast should be supplemented by a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast, because freedom without responsibility just descends into chaos and meaninglessness.
To help us live this out, he offers this mental exercise. It's a bit of a mind bender, but let's walk through it.
He says, live as if you were living already for the second time and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you were about to act now.
Okay, let's break that down slowly. It's like a thought experiment.
Exactly. Imagine you're on your deathbed at the end of a long life. You're looking back, and you remember this very moment we are in right now, and you remember that in this moment you made a terrible mistake. You were cowardly or selfish or lazy. You feel the full weight of that regret.
Okay, I'm there. It feels awful.
Now, imagine you were given a second chance. You are magically transported back to right now. You are living this moment for the second time. What do?
You fix it. You do it right this time. You don't make the same mistake.
That is how we should live every moment. We should act with the awareness that the present is all we have and that our choices are carving our past into stone.
Yeah.
It forces you to wake up and take responsibility for the now.
It puts a tremendous weight, but also a tremendous power into the present moment. You realize you are the one holding the pen.
And that is the ultimate takeaway of this entire book. You are not just a product of your genetics or your childhood or your circumstances. Even in the worst imaginable environment, you are the one who decides who you are going to be.
So, as we start to wrap up this deep dive, what does all of this mean for us today? For the person listening to this on their commute or washing the dishes, we're not in Auschwitz. Most of us live in relative comfort.
Well, Frankl would say the search for meaning is just as urgent, maybe even more so. In a strange way, our comfort can hide the problem. We don't have an obvious external suffering to push against. We have to find our meaning in a world of overwhelming choice and distraction.
The book fundamentally shifts the central question of life. We tend to walk around asking, what can I get from life? Why isn't life giving me happiness? Why is this happening to me?
And Frankl just grabs you by the shoulders and turns you around 180 degrees. He says, that's the wrong question. You have to stop asking what you expect from life. The real question is, What does life expect from you?
Life is the one asking the questions.
Every day, every hour, every situation is a question life is posing to you. How will you respond to this challenge at work? How will you respond to this difficult person? How will you respond to this moment of boredom? And you don't answer with words. You answer with your actions.
That's the challenge. We think meaning is something out there, something we'll find one day when we get the right job or meet the right person. But Frankl insists that meaning is available right now in the attitude you choose to take toward whatever is right in front of you.
And that's a terrifying thought, but it's also the most empowering thought there is. You don't have to wait. The meaning is in the response.
I think I want to leave our listeners with one final provocative thought. Viktor Frankl found meaning in the deepest hell that humanity has ever engineered. If it's possible to find it there, then we have absolutely no excuse not to find it in our own lives. So the challenge is this. Where is your concentration camp today? Maybe it's not a camp with barbed wire. Maybe it's a chronic illness, a dead-end job, a difficult relationship. Whatever your unavoidable suffering is, the question Frankl leaves us with is, what attitude are you choosing toward it right now?
That's the ultimate question.
This was it on today's book, guys. And guys, kindly subscribe and follow us for more such insights on various books, and also do not forget to join our social media community to stay in touch and get updates.